Good afternoon, everybody. A very short presentation from me on the link between Mauser and FN. So I'll talk about the company FN, a little bit about the person Mauser, but mainly the company Mauser, of course. Many of these pictures and documents come from the ARS Mechanica Foundation, which is the heritage foundation of FN Herstal. Inside the factory we still have a lot of blueprints, we have still a lot of handwritten documents, we have thousands of glass plates as well. So we see that the company's history, the company Mauser, which our colleagues here are presenting today, are very similar to what has happened or what has happened at FN in the past. The impact of Mauser's products on FN is very, very important. The company was founded to manufacture this kind of design, the Mauser design, 1889, and over almost a century manufactured about 1.5 million Mauser rifles and carbines, with thousands and thousands more for the civilian market. Below on the pictures you can see the factory of FN in the 1900s, with on the left Google Maps, thank you Google, for a satellite view of today's assembly building, which is still called Le Mauser. So still today there's a reference to the origins. The Fabrique Nationale, so founded in 1889, initially only for 30 years. So a temporary company, a temporary cooperation between different manufacturers, in anticipation of the Belgian tender, of which we will talk a little bit more later. And it was a syndicate. A syndicate is very important and very common practice at that time. So here in the Liege area we had many, dozens, even hundreds of firearms manufacturers, some very small, so workshops at home almost, up to bigger ones that had a few hundreds of workers, but none of them was big enough to manufacture or to handle a big contract of an upcoming tender, 150,000 weapons for the Belgian government. So there was a combination of forces, so the sales network, the different patents and production capacities. A little word on the Fabricants d'Armes de Guerre Réunis. That was a syndicate that was just before the FN company was founded. You can see all different names over there. The one with the star, the asterisk behind it, are later founding members of FN. So even though this was a separate company, no direct link or official link with FN, those were the same persons that did the same thing, a syndicate for an upcoming contract. Why am I mentioning this? Well, those Fabricants d'Armes de Guerre Réunis were to compete in Constantinople, Ottoman Empire, where they first met some interesting persons. So in 1886, Constantinople, which you have already heard before today, there was a black powder tender, so it's still the old type of powder, the non-smokeless powder, with a potential of 500,000 rifles. And every day or regularly there were letters coming back from the agent in Turkey, sent to Herstal or to Liege, to the syndicat, saying what was happening over there. And in the archives of the Fabricants d'Armes de Guerre Réunis, those are now held by FN, are the first mention of Mauser and Liege are the most serious competitor. So that's the first time the name Mauser appears in FN's archives. And it was decided to start negotiations in order to get the possibility or the permission to manufacture those rifles. And it was also agreed upon with Mauser and Liege that the future FN would be able to do that, but it was excluding the upcoming Belgian tender. This tender started in 1885, so before the Turkish one, but everything had to be done again because initially it was with black powder rifles. For the people interested in firearms, you know that in 1886 the French adopted the Lebel rifle, the model 1886, which was the first true smokeless powder rifle. So the Belgians had to start all over again. All of the black powder rifles were modified to fire this new round. And almost at the same time, there was a certain Mr. Mauser that came to Brussels to present his product. This is an extract of the archives held by Mr. Baudino of the diary entrance of Paul Mauser, saying that he was going to Brussels in that era, and shortly after, the Mauser rifle was a contender in the Belgian program. So inside this program, there were over 10 different contenders, and soon this was reduced to 2, Mannlicher and Mauser. They were considered the only good war weapons, the bonnes armes de guerre. And everybody expected Mannlicher to win. So the Manufacture d'Armes de l'État, which was more or less the state arsenal, already bought 35,000 wooden blocks to make Mannlicher butt stocks. There was already an agreement between the future FN and Mannlicher to manufacture this design, but ultimately it was Mauser that won. And this was a very important step in armament history. So this was the first small caliber smokeless Mauser rifle with a one-piece bolt. So for technical discussions we can maybe do it during the coffee break, but this is very important in the history, with a semi-fixed boxed magazine. Leading to a very complicated situation. So you had the inventor, Mauser. The rights were owned by Liege. You had an agent in Belgium, Monsieur Résimont. Manufacturing rights were between Liege and the Belgian state. Manufacturer was the FN company, doing it on machinery supplied by Liege. So here you can see a setup of part of the factory where you have drive shafts and leather belts making the machines turn. And it's hard to see, but on some of the glass plate pictures, there's the Ludwig Liege logo, which is here. Yeah. So about 90% of FN's machinery at that time came from Liege. So the patent, FN of course wanted to avoid such a complicated situation, wanted to be a direct manufacturer, direct supplier of Mauser designs, and agreed upon with Mauser Liege to have a license. And this is very important, the way it was formulated in the agreement. So a license to manufacture all small caliber repeating rifles based on the Belgian model 1889 with already introduced and future improvements. You have heard during Mauro Bodino's presentation that for the Turkish, for example, this open agreement was very flexible. They started out with tubular magazine, black powder rifle with a different bolt, but it evolved several times until it was something much more advanced. We can say that for FN, Liege and Mauser were not so flexible. So FN, after completion of the 1889 contract, 150,000, which was finished almost completely finished by the end of 1894, needed new markets. Belgium, small country, relatively small armed forces, did not have a requirement at that time, so the only option for FN was to go abroad, export market, and contacted the network of Cockering, a major company in the region as well. So there were negotiations ongoing, 93, 94, with offers to Argentina, contract with Brazil, proposal to Chile and to Spain. Now, Liege did not like this. A major salesman contacted his network as well, which led to a limitation of the success of FN's negotiations. For Chile, Chile drops FN, even though there was an agreement in principle, just saying, we like you, we like your product. In an official letter this was written, but we stop working with you because we are afraid of legal issues and we want this tender to be resolved quickly. So they stopped and went to the German suppliers. Spain said the new rifle is different from the Belgian model and not covered by the license. I suppose there was a little bit of suggestions made by Liege of about what to write in the text. And Liege also directly contacted FN through Mauser saying, stop within 3 days manufacturing of 6 patents. Those were patents related to magazines, to stripper clips, to the bolt, etc. So can you imagine a company of thousands of workers having to stop within 3 days the manufacturing of their main product? That's a really serious way of saying don't mess with us, a very threatening way as well. So what is this already introduced and future improvements on the Model 89? Very short technical side. So on the left, the 1889, you can see there's a box magazine, semi-removable. On the 1893, so is this an improvement, an evolution, or a completely new model? It's open for discussion. It's an internal box magazine. The bolt on the left is the 1889, where you see there's an extractor on top, over here, which is turning when you're opening and closing the bolt. That means that there's major stress on this, and it was prone to breaking. On the right, it's not turning anymore, and it's more later the world-renowned 1898 type of bolt, where you had the firing pin with intermittent locking mechanism. On the 1889, it was screw fit. If you say screw tightening something, you can screw it in either too much or too little, creating major problems when you fire a round. You could have gases coming back to the shooter and causing injury. So yes, it is an improvement. Is it an evolution covered by the license? Open for discussion. FN board was very divided on this case. Some persons wanted to go to court, wanted to fight back against Liege. Others said that this was not worth trying. And Mr. Pieper, a German-speaking board member of FN, started to contact the persons that were not happy with the situation and trying to get hold of more shares of the FN company in favor of Ludwig Liege, a name that we've already heard several times before, Liege from the Deutsche Waffen- und Maschinenfabrik. And he bought all of the available shares of all of the persons that resigned from the FN board. He put his friends, his trustees inside the company. And for example, the lawyer that was attacking FN on the patent issues now became FN's company lawyer. So that gives you an idea how hard he would fight for FN's rights in the license. Consequences were that FN became part of the Deutsche Waffen- und Maschinenfabrik, and so part of Liege's consortium, but only got 15% of all shares, needing FN to diversify into the civilian market, for example, with Browning weapon designs, with cars, with trucks, bikes, everything one can imagine to keep the staff at work. Then came the First World War. The company FN refused to work for the German occupier. International conventions allowed the occupier to seize everything related to arms, so that can be arms, components, gauges, tools, machines. So FN refused to do anything in that activity. But the Belgian board members insisted on continuing to pay the staff, so as a social engagement. German board members, they did not oppose to the German government seizing all of the machinery for the manufacturing of firearms. And maybe it's a coincidence, but all of these machines went to Berlin, to Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionsfabriken. Here is a picture coming from the ARS Mechanica Foundation, where you can see German Landsturm soldiers within FN factory walls, so a factory making FN weapons. Germans were mainly armed with Mauser rifles, but Germans occupying the FN factory are carrying Russian Mosin-Nagant rifles. Then, after the war, the Belgian government seized all of the DWM property in Belgium, and not only BWM, but all of the German interests in the country. This made the position of the FN board members, the German ones, untenable, so they had to resign. German arms industry was cut back, so the army was reduced, the industry could no longer make, or almost no longer make, military firearms, and these were the start of the heydays for FN. The heydays with export, and FN was, if not the biggest, it was in the top 3 of arms manufacturers in the world, up to the Second World War. Here you can see some Mauser barrels at the assembly at FN. So the link between FN on the left and Mr. Mauser on the right was definitely Ludwig Lunger, the Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionsfabriken. Thank you very much.